December 2020. 2 signatures on a contract worth $25 million. The ink was barely dry before the celebrations began in Montecito. Archwell Audio was going to change podcasting. Meghan Markle was going to redefine what meaningful conversation looked like in the digital age. Insiders described the mood inside the Sussex operation as euphoric, vindicated, and certain. Certain that the decision to walk away from the royal family had not merely been justified, but proven correct by the most persuasive language available to the modern imagination. Money. Serious money. Platform money. The kind of money that doesn't just validate a decision, it enshrines it. What actually happened over the following 30 months was something that no press release, no staged paparazzi walk, and no sympathetically placed People magazine exclusive could adequately explain away. What happened was nothing. And in the entertainment industry, nothing is the most expensive word in existence. The Spotify deal had been structured with the internal logic of a partnership between 2 entities that each believed they were getting the better end of the arrangement. Spotify wanted cultural cachet, a globally recognizable name attached to its premium podcast infrastructure, and the kind of conversation-generating presence that translated into subscriber growth and advertiser confidence. Archwell Audio wanted legitimacy, revenue, and the institutional validation of a major platform, staking $25 million on the proposition that Meghan Markle had something meaningful to say to the world outside a palace. The contract specified 12 episodes and 1 holiday special across a 3-year framework, with renewal options contingent on performance metrics that were standard in the industry and entirely reasonable given the investment. What it could not have specified, because no contract can account for the complete absence of professional follow-through, was what Spotify executives would eventually be forced to confront in quarterly review after quarterly review: that the woman who had sold them on intimate conversation, personal storytelling, and authentic engagement was producing content at a rate of 0.3 episodes per month. Across 30 months, 12 episodes. A figure so staggeringly below expectation that it stopped being a performance issue and became something closer to a philosophical statement about the nature of the agreement itself. The post-termination audits that followed the contract's cancellation in mid-2023 produced a revelation that landed in media and legal circles with the force of something genuinely unprecedented. Meghan Markle had not personally conducted several of the interviews that bore her name and her voice. The methodology, reconstructed from internal production documents and whistleblower accounts, was clinical in its inauthenticity. Junior producers gathered the raw content. Questions were assembled, conversations were recorded, material was collected. And then, in post-production, Meghan's voice was dubbed in to simulate personal engagement, to create the auditory impression of a woman present in conversations she had never actually entered. The implications of this were not merely commercial, they were foundational. The entire Archetypes podcast had been sold on the premise of intimacy, a woman of extraordinary global experience sitting across from other women of achievement, and having the kind of honest, unguarded conversation that audiences could not access anywhere else. The premium attached to the Meghan brand was precisely the premium of presence, of authenticity, of the sense that what you were hearing was real. The post-production dubbing didn't just undermine that premium. It retroactively destroyed every episode it touched, turning each one from a document of genuine exchange into a performance of one, assembled in an editing suite with the human warmth of a corporate training module. Bill Simmons, Spotify's head of podcast innovation, delivered his assessment in language that was coarse, direct, and has since been cited in legal filings and media ethics studies with a frequency that suggests it captured something the more measured institutional language could not. He called the couple outright grifters. He noted that 12 episodes across 30 months represented a productivity rate he had witnessed surpassed by interns in their first week. The statement was not policy. It was testimony, and it resonated because it articulated, without diplomatic padding, what the numbers had been saying for 2 years in the language that industry professionals actually use when the cameras are not present. Spotify's final accounting was equally unambiguous. The platform paid an estimated 45% to 48% of the original deal value, invoking clawback clauses written into the contract for precisely the scenarios of underperformance and reputational damage that had materialized. Meghan's team threatened legal retaliation. They backed down when confronted with contractual proof of noncompliance, so comprehensive that proceeding would have required arguing in a courtroom that 12 episodes in 30 months constituted satisfactory delivery of a product sold as a transformative cultural contribution. The Netflix relationship told a different story in its architecture, but arrived at the same destination. The $100 million deal signed in 2021 represented the apex of the Sussex commercial proposition, the moment when the bet placed on leaving the monarchy appeared to have been validated at a scale that silenced even the most persistent critics. Netflix wanted what Spotify had wanted, amplified: global reach, prestige association. The narrative power of the most talked-about couple on Earth, channeled through the world's most influential streaming platform. Pearl was canceled in pre-production following budget overruns and creative disputes that insiders described as irreconcilable. Heart of Invictus failed to enter the global top 10 despite the inherent human interest of its subject matter. Live to Lead, the Mandela-framed documentary that had been positioned as the Sussex operation's contribution to global social consciousness, received critical notices that used words like hollow and agenda-driven with a consistency suggesting reviewers across outlets had independently arrived at the same assessment. And then came with Love Meghan, the lifestyle pivot, the Goop adjacency, the attempt to reposition Meghan as a warm, accessible guide to conscious living, which recorded a 0% critic score on Rotten Tomatoes and an 88% viewer dropout rate before the end of its first episode. Netflix canceled the series on January 5, 2026, citing lack of viewership in terms that required no elaboration. What required elaboration, and received it through back-channel PR communications distributed to entertainment journalists within days of the cancellation, was Meghan's own explanation for the failure. King Charles, she alleged through anonymous surrogates, had deliberately scheduled Trooping the Color to coincide with the With Love Meghan launch, suppressing its visibility in a calculated act of institutional sabotage against a female voice. The claim collapsed on contact with the most basic factual scrutiny. Trooping the Color has been constitutionally fixed in June for over 260 years. Its date is set months in advance by the Ministry of Defense. It is entirely outside palace scheduling discretion. It has never, in its entire modern history, been deployed as a programming countermeasure against a Netflix lifestyle series. Netflix executives privately described the theory as a pathetic excuse. One senior programming director stated with the weary precision of someone who had spent considerable professional energy on a project that had failed on its own terms, "It wasn't the parade that killed the show. It was the show that killed the show." The Trooping the Color claim was not an isolated deflection. It was the latest iteration of a blame architecture that had been under construction since 2020. The British press blamed for racism in 2020. The palace blamed for mental health neglect in 2021. Spotify blamed for poor collaboration in 2023. And now King Charles blamed for scheduling a constitutionally fixed ceremonial event. Each iteration had found an audience. Each iteration had generated the sympathetic coverage it was designed to generate. But the accumulation of iterations had produced something the individual instances had not: a recognizable pattern, and a public that had grown fluent enough in the pattern to identify it before the press release finished loading. By February 2026, Penguin Random House had joined the cascade. Spare had sold well, but with Prince William's lawsuit citing malicious falsehood and requesting full subpoena of unedited manuscript drafts, ghostwriter communications, and internal email threads outlining content monetization strategy, the publishing house's breach of warranty clause had been activated. A source inside the house stated the position with commercial clarity. They had been promised an honest memoir. If the court ruled Book 1 was knowingly false, Books 2 through 4 would never see daylight. The commercial empire built on the foundation of royal secrets was discovering, in sequence and without sentiment, that foundations built on borrowed material collapse the moment the original owner demands it back. Archwell Foundation, February 2026. 0 production deals, 0 profitable platforms, 1 active high court subpoena. The $25 million was gone. The $100 million was gone. The publishing pipeline was frozen. And the editing suite, where a voice had been dubbed over someone else's conversations, sat dark and silent, which was, under the circumstances, the only appropriate condition for it. Filed the 10th of February 2026. King's Bench Division of the High Court of Justice, London. Claimant, His Royal Highness Prince William, Prince of Wales. Defendant, Prince Henry Charles Albert David, Duke of Sussex. The filing was 23 pages. Each page was a door closing. Together, they represented something the British monarchy had not done in living memory: stopped absorbing the damage, picked up the documentation, walked into a courtroom and said, with the full institutional weight of the future crown behind every syllable, enough. The decision had not been impulsive. Palace sources confirmed it had been made jointly by Prince William and King Charles III in early January 2026, following internal polling that showed a dramatic and measurable shift in public sentiment. 68% of UK respondents supporting revocation of Sussex titles, a figure that represented not merely public opinion but institutional permission. William had endured 5 years of personal attacks in enforced silence, watching allegations about his character, his marriage, his conduct, and his family packaged into memoirs and documentaries and podcast episodes, and sold to global audiences at commercial rates that transformed private pain into monetized product. He had waited, he had built, and when the moment arrived, he had filed. The legal team from Harbottle and Lewis presented a multi-pronged civil claim constructed around 3 central pillars: defamation via malicious falsehood, misuse of private and medical information, and breach of contract under the non-disclosure agreements signed at Sandringham in January 2020. Each pillar was individually substantial. Together, they formed a structure designed not merely to win damages, but to establish a precedent so comprehensive that it would define the boundaries of what a departing royal could commercially exploit for every future generation. The defamation claim led with the story that had lodged most deeply in public consciousness: the Nottingham Cottage altercation of 2019, described in spare with the kind of specific physical detail that gives false allegations their most dangerous quality: plausibility through particularity. Harry had written that William knocked him to the floor during an argument about Meghan, that he landed on a dog bowl, that the bowl broke, that he was left with visible injuries. The detail of the dog bowl had become one of the most discussed passages in the memoir, precise enough to feel witnessed, dramatic enough to feel significant, intimate enough to feel true. It was not true. William's legal team submitted 3 sworn affidavits from royal protection officers present at Nottingham Cottage on the evening in question. Court-filed security logs recorded no altercation, no medical treatment, no property damage of any kind. Palace records confirmed the dog bowl in the specific format described by Harry had not existed at the location at the time. The officers' affidavits were consistent with each other and with the documentary record in every material detail. Against them, Harry's legal team had a published book. The asymmetry was not accidental. It was the product of 4 years of methodical evidence preservation, cross-referencing every claim in every interview and documentary and memoir passage against internal logs and archives that had been quietly compiled since mid-2023 precisely for this moment. William's filing characterized the methodology with language that was legally precise and institutionally devastating. These stories, it stated, were not recollections. They were commodities, knowingly fabricated, packaged for maximum commercial exploitation, and deployed as bait to extract multi-million-dollar deals from platforms whose business model rewarded emotional intensity and royal proximity regardless of factual accuracy. The distinction the filing drew between memory and manufacture was the distinction that malicious falsehood law required, not merely that something was inaccurate, but that the person publishing it knew it was inaccurate and published it anyway for financial gain. William's legal team stated their confidence in establishing that distinction with characteristic institutional understatement. The receipts, they indicated, existed. The NDA breach component of the lawsuit required a return to the 13th of January, 2020, and a 5-hour summit at Sandringham House that the press had covered as tense but productive, and that the participants had known to be something considerably more structured than that description implied. Harry left the estate having signed a detailed non-disclosure agreement that covered royal operational procedures and internal protocols, security briefings and staff hierarchies, private communications including emails, messages, and handwritten notes, medical disclosures involving members of the royal family, and a 5-year media neutrality cooling-off period during which the commercialization of any protected information was explicitly and comprehensively prohibited. The agreement was not ambiguous. It was not loosely worded. It had been drafted by constitutional advisors who had anticipated, with professional precision, exactly the kind of commercial operation that would subsequently be constructed around the Sussex departure. Every category of protected information that later appeared in Spare, in the Netflix documentary, in the Archetypes podcast, in production decks submitted to streaming platforms, had been explicitly listed. The NDA was not a general confidentiality request. It was a detailed inventory of precisely what could not be sold, signed by a man who then spent the following 3 years selling it. Meghan had not attended the Sandringham summit in person. She had been required to sign a parallel NDA remotely. She refused, arguing she was not a direct employee or heir, and therefore not bound by the same obligations. The palace, calculating that forcing the issue would generate the kind of media speculation that would undermine the carefully managed narrative of a peaceful exit arrangement, allowed the refusal to pass without consequence. That administrative decision, reasonable in the context of January 2020, catastrophic in the context of February 2026, became the single most consequential lapse in the entire Sussex legal saga, and the fault line along which Meghan's subsequent legal strategy would attempt to run. William's legal team had assembled 120 pages of breach documentation. The material was specific, sourced, and chronologically organized. In early 2021, internal palace emails and draft communications had been transmitted from an Archwell server to Netflix development teams. These documents included security layouts of Frogmore Cottage, communications between King Charles and senior aides regarding the management of Harry's departure, and unverified summaries of private conversations involving the Princess of Wales. Each of these categories had been explicitly protected under the 2020 agreement. Their provision to an American media corporation, without redaction, without consent, and without any discernible attempt to assess their protected status, constituted under UK privacy and confidentiality law a breach of sufficient clarity that the legal question was not whether a breach had occurred, but how extensively the court would quantify its consequences. The marketing materials for the Archetypes podcast had referenced confidential 2018 email exchanges between Meghan and Kensington Palace staff, medically sensitive comments made by King Charles about stress and personal well-being, and a private conversation with Catherine during her 3rd pregnancy that had later appeared, refined, and contextualized in Spare. A draft presentation submitted to Spotify's content development team had treated these materials not as sensitive private information, but as promotional assets, selling points, differentiators, evidence that what the platform was purchasing had authentic royal interior access. The legal position was unambiguous. These were never intended for public use and had no public interest defense that any serious legal argument could sustain. Meghan's response to the lawsuit's filing was visible, studied, and ultimately counterproductive. The staged Montecito paparazzi appearance within 48 hours, Christian Dior, green juice, direct eye contact with a prearranged camera, was a signature move that her team had deployed successfully in previous cycles of negative coverage. It was designed to project unbothered confidence, to shift the visual narrative from courtroom documents to lifestyle imagery, to remind the public that whatever was happening in a London legal filing, the woman at the center of it was composed, prosperous, and entirely unbothered. The public reaction was overwhelmingly negative. The phrase PR overparenting trended on the platform formerly known as Twitter After the images circulated on the same day, the court summoned Archwell for legal document production. The move that had worked in 2021 and 2023 had, by February 2026, become its own indictment. Privately, insiders confirmed the composure was performance. Meghan's team was in active crisis management over contract fallout with Spotify, attempting to prevent Netflix from triggering residual option termination clauses and constructing the legal architecture of what would become her central courtroom strategy, distance. She had not read the final spare manuscript. The Netflix documentary had been Harry's project. Archwell's operational failures were joint management issues beyond her direct control. Each statement was calibrated to place her at one remove from the specific decisions that the NDA breach documentation made most legally dangerous. The strategy was visible enough that even members of the Sussex inner circle had begun to register its implications. A former Archwell producer, speaking to the Times with the resignation of someone who had watched the operation from the inside and understood exactly what was being constructed, delivered the assessment that no legal brief could have framed more efficiently. She was the architect, they said. Every decision passed through her. The attempt to position herself as a peripheral figure in an operation she had centrally directed was not merely legally insufficient. It was, to those who had witnessed the reality, an inversion so complete it constituted its own kind of testimony. The parliamentary dimensions of the lawsuit had by this point moved from theoretical to imminent. MP Bob Seeley's bill to amend the Titles Deprivation Act 1917, its key clause allowing revocation of any peerage or royal title from a holder engaged in conduct injurious to the crown, had been progressing through the legislative process in the abstract. William's High Court filing gave it concrete legal attachment for the first time. A ruling against Harry would trigger a parliamentary vote within 10 working days. The Duke of Sussex title would be revoked. Meghan would revert to Princess Harry, a designation she reportedly found intolerable, which was, in the corridors of Westminster, considered an additional rather than mitigating feature of the outcome. The Councillor of State dimension was, constitutionally, the most serious implication of all. Harry remained, on paper, legally capable of acting on behalf of the king during periods of royal incapacity, a status that constitutional experts were now arguing had become untenable the moment a high court filing charged him with malicious falsehood against the heir to the throne. King Charles was under increasing pressure to formally request parliamentary removal from the councillor list. If approved, it would be the first such removal in modern constitutional history. The institution that had once bent its own protocols to accommodate Harry's departure was now being asked to use those same protocols, in their most formal and permanent application, to complete it. The preliminary hearing was set for March 14, 2026. Pre-trial document exchange was ordered by March 1st. Archwell's email servers, Netflix and Spotify contracts, spare drafts, ghostwriter correspondence, internal content strategy communications, all of it now subject to legal compulsion that Meghan's team had until February 25th to respond to. Failure to comply carried the prospect of default judgment, dramatically expanding the damages calculation. The courtroom had become the only arena that mattered. And in that arena, unlike the paparazzi sidewalk and the sympathetic magazine and the back-channel PR email, the rules of evidence applied equally to everyone inside it regardless of wardrobe, regardless of narrative, and regardless of how many years a particular story had gone unchallenged in the court of public opinion. The receipts William's team had said existed. In 3 weeks, the court would see them. There is a specific kind of institutional moment when restraint transforms into precision, when the entity that has spent years absorbing damage picks up every receipt, organizes them chronologically, and hands them to a barrister. Prince William's decision to file high court case. It was not emotional. It was the culmination of 4 years of quiet, methodical, unglamorous preparation. The kind that generates no headlines while it is happening, and generates every headline once it is complete. The transformation in William's public perception was measurable and immediate. The man characterized for years by his silence, criticized by Sussex sympathizers as cold, by royal traditionalists as insufficiently assertive, had executed a three-part strategic operation of textbook institutional precision. He had protected Charles and Catherine from direct engagement, never requiring either to dignify individual allegations with institutional attention. He had deployed hard law against PR spin, sworn affidavits against memoir anecdotes, court-filed security logs against commercially packaged recollections. And he had waited, with a patience that his critics had misread as passivity, until Sussex credibility had cratered, until public support had measurably inverted, until the commercial empire had visibly and completely collapsed, before filing a claim the evidence had supported for years. The complete Sussex commercial catalog required no editorial embellishment, zero production deals, no profitable platforms, an entertainment industry designation, uninsurable, that had begun appearing in Lowe's Angels and New York agency conversations with the quiet permanence of a professional obituary. The skincare brand that halted its promotional campaign. The podcast studio that rejected Harry's fatherhood pitch citing pending litigation. The film agency that pulled its executive producer deal citing brand toxicity. Even traditionally sympathetic outlets, The Cut, Harper's Bazaar, had reduced coverage, with one editor citing reputational risk in language that suggested the calculation had been straightforward. The audience that had once been receptive had reached the end of its patience, and no rebranding exercise could manufacture sympathy from exhaustion. Meghan's final pivot was visible in its architecture and structurally unsound in its foundation. Complete public silence on Harry's legal defense. Solo lifestyle branding initiatives centered on California humanitarianism and conscious motherhood. Divorce negotiations quietly underway, with the positioning of herself as misled wife and survivor assembled for maximum custody leverage and minimum legal exposure. The polling numbers made the entire construction academic. 71% of UK respondents supported permanent title revocation. 58% of American viewers stated explicit fatigue. The audience was gone. The platforms were gone. The partnerships were gone. And the narrative, recycled across 6 years through every available channel until it had worn itself smooth, had nothing left to say that anyone remaining was willing to hear. The royal family compact signed by Anne and Sophie affirming non-engagement under any future circumstance required no elaboration. Charles and William were in agreement. No negotiation, no contact, no privileges, no titles, no role of any kind. The institution had not shouted, it had documented, it had filed, it had waited. And now the silence surrounding the House of Sussex was not the silence of indifference. It was the silence of completion. They had sold the illusion of pain as currency. The illusion was bankrupt, and the monarchy, unhurried, untroubled, and permanent, simply continued.